Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Law and Finance Show. And today we have a great guest. Now, this guest has been on before. And I'm telling you, when Nance and I met, I will say she's one of those type of people that when you meet her, you talk to her, you have a conversation with her, you're like, you know what? I am so glad that I met her. I mean, just an all around great person. Plus, she's also received up to 3 awards for an amazing book. And she does a lot in the area of conflict resolution. So stay tuned for today's episode. So, without further ado, let me bring on my amazing guest. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well, and I have to say I love the new intro, for this for this particular episode. It's wonderful to see you and your wife living lives that you love, which is I know you're passionate about bringing that forward for your guests. So for your guests and the viewers. So thank you for doing that. I'm already inspired.
Awesome, awesome. Well, yeah, it has definitely been a very fun and interesting journey of, like I said, of I think living in this remote world has done it even more where you can do the show from anywhere and you can start to weave in like, hey, more than just me sitting here in front of the camera of just like my wife and I filming and bringing some insight and information to business owners from so many different angles. So yeah, thank you for that.
Well, thank you. So that's what we're here to do is create some magic. So what do we want to talk about today?
Yeah, so definitely I do want to talk about, your book, and I want to talk about the amazing work that you're doing and just kind of how things are going on in your business. And but for the people that may have not have seen the first episode when you were on the show, I guess that was back in 2020. So almost 2 years. So can you tell all the new people a little bit about your background, and then we'll hop into the exciting things going on with you?
Yeah, so I'm an employment attorney, but I'm also a mediator. So I've been trained in ethno-religious mediation and spent a couple of years over at the UN volunteering there in that particular space. So it's positioned me pretty well for an opportunity that I got to be a diversity trainer at a local college. So it's my passion that I now bring into my work in a different angle than I had done it before. So I'm really enjoying that opportunity that, during the pandemic, I was furloughed from that position for a year and a half, but I got to go back in the fall. And so I'm really enjoying working with the athletics departments, which is, my background is in sport. So it's really amazing how life just brings everything kind of full circle for you. And so I'm getting to do a lot of that and work with people in high trauma areas. So I'm, as obviously in diversity, we're talking about race, gender, disability, or differently abled, as we like to say now. We're looking at religion and basically all the isms and just creating opportunity for people, which is why I went to law school. So I'm thrilled that despite all the challenges that we've seen during the pandemic and economic downturn and everything else, businesses closing, I'm also seeing a lot of businesses pivoting and finding new ways to express themselves in the marketplace in a way that benefits but still fulfills on goals from a variety of angles. And I think that's one of the big things that I'm out there to do is create partnerships among people because that's where everything happens.
Mhm. Awesome. One of the things that's becoming in that I'm interested in from your perspective is, you know, as I think more attention has been, I guess you say, given to people that have faced challenges in workplaces, where I think before a lot of people felt like, hey, I was the only one dealing with this. But now that they're seeing more information come out about this, they're starting to realize, or it seems like people are starting to realize, hey, I'm not the only one dealing with this. Is a problem that I probably should speak up on. Has that been something that you've seen happen over time?
I have, and, I think one of the nice things is you get a few people that stand up, right? And they speak out, and they risk a lot by doing that. Some of them, I was one of them when I was working in sport. I ended up in a lawsuit, right? And, then it became very difficult for me to get a job back in sport. And so I know the risks that come with that, but I also really admire other people who even go further than I was able to go. Because what happens then is it does raise awareness to the extent that we've gotten where you can't ignore it anymore. And
Mhm,
then the pandemic, coming in conjunction with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we saw just you have to be living under a rock or in complete
mhm,
denial to avoid this conversation. So one of the things that I've been working on for my entire career is creating opportunities to have those conversations in productive ways. And I think we're going to see a division, right, in
mhm,
the employers who still want to control and think that's their place, right? That's
mhm.
fine. There's room for everything in the world, right? But they're gonna find that it's gonna be more and more difficult to find
Mhm,
employees that come and stay.
mhm,
So, you're a lot of what we're seeing is a lot of employers are finally listening. And maybe it wasn't that they weren't interested. It's just, look, you've probably worked in these places over your career before you took out on your own. Sometimes it's just we're so overwhelmed with the work that we have to do to get through the day, and we're in that survival mode that we're not thinking about being more intentional until we're forced to. And
mhm,
so, we try to now do this in a way that we don't have to wait for a pandemic or,
mhm,
some sort of natural disaster or a war or an
mhm.
illness before we start taking action on the things we say matter to us.
Mhm. One of the interesting things that I found, like, before I went off into starting my own business, of as I was coming up in the corporate world, after I got to a certain level and was talking with, I guess, some of the people who are in leadership, and just having, casual conversations with them. One of the things that I realized is that some of the problems or the pressure that people below them felt like they were feeling themselves, but it almost seemed like no one had really established a mechanism for people to be able to communicate that and talk through that. So it seemed like there was just a ton of misconceptions that were going on. I guess, have you seen anything like that in the work that you do?
Yes, unfortunately, those are my clients that sometimes come to me with litigation, right? Because they hadn't been addressing those early on. And that's just human nature, and that's the other thing that I try to work with people on is that, employment is a partnership between employer and employee. So we all bring something to the table and we make the choices, whether we're doing it consciously or not, because as you know, not deciding, right? Like letting the world decide for you is also a decision. And so there's always a consequence to that. And I think that's what I've started to notice is that people are recognizing that their employees are going through a lot. For example, the pandemic brought a lot of those personal issues into the workplace because we were doing work from home. I had a woman in one of my meetings it was about an hour meeting, and three of her children had to come to her for something at some point, because if you have kids, you know that the moment you get on the phone, you're the most interesting person in the world. So it's the same thing in video, right? And what I loved about it was people just rolled with it. It
Mhm.
didn't really disrupt anything unless somebody got upset about it, but she just handled it. She's like, "Here's a snack. Go get that. Your laundry's there," right? And she's just doing all of this. And I think, employers started to recognize that if they just support people a little bit more, instead of judging them for not doing it the same way that they would, it opened a lot of opportunity. If anything, what we've heard from a lot of employers is that their employees are more productive, and if anything, they're working from home. They need to be told to separate because we're not skilled in that, and
Yeah.
you probably know this for yourself, right? When you are working from home, it's always there, and for those of us that are really committed to our work, if anything, we need somebody to pull us away from work. It's not like we're sitting on the TV eating ice cream, right? Sitting in front of the TV, not on the TV either.
When it's one of those rough days, you may find yourself sitting on the TV.
Who knows? I'm like I said, I'm in the middle of a move, so I might have to sit on the TV.
I think that is a very interesting point because even for people who saw like the first conversation that you and I had, I mean, my background is definitely different. And part of that was like, I have a detached garage at my house. And so my wife and I decided we'll turn the second floor into my office because I felt like I was always working when I was working in the house to where it's just like, I could never turn it off to the point where it's like I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I just got to try to take like 4 days off. And before, my trick used to be is I would go on a cruise because cruises would force me to disconnect. Well, during the pandemic, probably not the best option for you.
Yeah.
um, so it just, yeah, I totally agree. I think I wonder if as we've kind of seen like the Great Resignation, and we've seen a lot of people working remotely is that a conversation that you hear a lot of employers talking about with their people of helping them kind of cope with this change of what working remotely entails?
I hate to admit this, but I think what I'm hearing more is that it's the middle managers and the people don't have a lot of power to make the decisions. It's the lower level managers and the employees themselves, at the entry level all the way up to management, not at the executive level, right? It's all of the other people who don't have the decision making power who are saying, they're going to make me come back into work, and this doesn't work with my life the same way. We've got right now with the war going on in Ukraine, we've got gas prices, going through the roof for people. And if
Yeah.
you're having to commute back and forth when you could actually work from home, it just doesn't make a lot of sense for you financially, which is going to add to, I think, some employers losing employees because of they're not able to manage all of the responsibilities in the way that they got to during the pandemic, even if it was an adjustment in the beginning. So what I'm hearing from employees is that's a concern for them. They finally got their lives to work, right, in the work from home, and now they're being forced to make it not work again or adjust and figure it out again. And it's like, I'm a fan of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And I think a lot of people are in that conversation. But, then there are, of course, other employers who don't have the option. If you're a locksmith or a retailer that has people actually come on site, you don't have the option to let
Yeah.
your employees work from home. So I think there's just a lot of conversation that needs to occur that's not yet occurring,
Mhm.
at least from what I'm hearing.
Gotcha, gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense because one of the things that I've observed is that I think for the probably the first time in many people's professional career, it's almost like they've had a real encounter with what supply chain actually means, of how like all of the different things in any economic system are so connected. Like, if the school system isn't able to have the kids show up at school. Like employers before didn't really think about, well, if this school is closed, what does it mean for all my employees who have children in that school? To where now it's just like, I think employers are having to see like how connected our lives really are. And like when one domino falls, like there has to be some type of cascading response. I mean, I guess, do you see employers starting to be more open to understanding how connected our lives are?
I think on the frontline supervisor
Mhm.
level and the employee level, there's a lot more conversation there. And this is my warning to to the executives who aren't having these conversations and looking for ways to actually resolve these conflicts. Your frontline supervisors are talking to the people that they supervise, and those conversations are occurring at that level. And if those conflicts are not resolved, you're going to continue to see the Great Resignation, and that's my prediction. I am an eternal optimist, and I know that there is so much opportunity for people to come together. But until those all of those levels are being included in the conversations about return to work and process and effectiveness, you're going to continue to see people dealing with what you're talking about with the kids that maybe are back and forth with school, because even though they're back in school, most of the kids are back in the school classroom. You still have situations where somebody comes in with COVID, and now you that whole classroom gets sent home for 5 to 10 days and has to go through the testing. Well, if you're a single parent in particular, somebody's got to be there to help you with that kid. You can't just send a kid home from school to an empty house, because then you'll get arrested for neglecting your child, right? And then your child could end up in the system. It has a whole snowball effect, like you said, and it's the supply chain and everything that's coming together. And so anybody that's not paying attention and acknowledging how connected we all are and always have been,
Mhm,
you're going to have more problems. But if you just kind of lean into it and say, how do we work with the interconnectivity?
mhm.
Then you're going to be able to produce amazing things.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I totally agree because I definitely think that now is probably a time more than ever where we're pulling more skills than more than just our technical skills of really the empathy of the being able to listen to people, being able to understand our people, and being able to communicate, to where all of those skills seem like it's like a higher demand is being placed on our non-technical skills. And I'm curious if you've seen people, you know, kind of making progress to adapting, or what things have you seen that people are doing to help them adapt to be able to meet that demand of their non-technical skills.
I am seeing more people leaning in to learning. The soft skills is what people call them. I don't, I think a lot of us would say those aren't really soft. They're super, super important, right? But that's the way they've been classified. And I think in the corporate space, we've been hearing that for a while. We've been hearing it in higher education that soft skills are going to be far more important than the technical skills going forward. And what happened with the pandemic is all of that got accelerated, right? Like, we've been kinda talking about it going, "Yeah, okay, that's something to think about for the future, okay," you know? And even my clients who were heavily resistant to having these conversations, and have been with some of them for decades, right? And they're kinda like, "Yeah, yeah, I know, yeah, that's they're talking about that, we should probably do that." And then the pandemic hit, and they said, "Tell us more about that other stuff you do." And they're wanting to learn. And then the other thing that I'm seeing is on the individual level. People are going, and you can probably look on things like LinkedIn Learning and Udemy and some of those online content management and education systems. People are taking courses to try and learn how to resolve conflicts, how to improve communication skills, and basically build on those skills that we don't get in school.
Nice, nice. So now, speaking of, like I said, the type of work that you do, I want to talk a little bit more about that. So like when you're working with your clients, what are some of like the pain points that they're experiencing that you're helping, bring resolution to?
So one of the common things that's been happening for the past 2 years in particular is just dealing with the ongoing conflicts between the employee coming to work, for example, and dealing with the demands of life and work, right? And especially with my small employers who are often right on the job next to their employee, right? Like maybe they are on the construction site with the employee hand in hand, right? They're sharing tools even. And so, you get people like that in that situation, and the employer's just exasperated, right? Just completely exhausted, frustrated, trying to keep the business going, but, hasn't yet separated from running the business and the business running them. And so what happens is then that employee calls in and they're so dependent upon them. And now they're going, okay, how am I going to do the job of me and my employee? And so I work with them on having the powerful conversation that they want to have, but maybe don't have the language for, also because the emotions are really high. And I think we've probably talked about this several times, that when your emotions are really high, the way Robert Kiyosaki says it is your intelligence goes down. And I like to say it as something slightly more generous, is that it's just we forget, like we go into reaction mode and the amygdala back here starts to get triggered and we just react. And what I like to do is halt people in that emotional state and just harness the emotion and rechannel it to a more powerful conversation. So I've been oddly doing a lot more of that for the past 2 years, even more than probably the legal work. It's a lot of conversation of, okay, I know I'm not supposed to just fly off the handle here, but I don't know how to deal with this because I'm just so overwhelmed and exhausted. So I get a lot of calls around that, and then I just kind of coach them through the language that also avoids a lawsuit or some sort of claim. So it's kind of a win-win. Plus, it saves a relationship that has every opportunity to continue working.
Gotcha, gotcha. I mean, that is amazing. I mean, it's one of those things that I've told someone is that there's that is a skill that has to be developed, or because I think it's not. I guess you say being able to calm yourself down in the heat of a situation or the heat of an incident isn't like a natural skill. Now, I would say, fortunate for me, like my father was a medic in the army. And so one of the things that, I kind of learned from him is like, when he had to go to war, and one of the things that, explain like, how do you keep yourself calm and, actually execute emergency field medic support like when you guys are under fire? And he was like, well, you have to train yourself to calm your senses down so that you can think somewhat clearly to be able to save somebody's life in a situation like that. Now, and it was one of those things that taught me is like, that's not an automatic skill. That's something we have to develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why in my book, I talk about the 7 choices and 5 actions of a master. It's a conflict resolution master. And those 7 choices are all about training yourself to think about what you're doing before you do it, right? It's like to halt and harness those thoughts. And it's in the beginning when you're not skilled at it, 7 choices sounds like, how am I ever going to apply that? But right. But what happens is the more you practice it, it's like tying your shoes. You don't even think about tying your shoes most of the time anymore, right? You just do it and then you're out the door. Sometimes you're doing it while brushing your teeth and doing it one-handed, right? And so that's what happens is the more you practice any of these skills, they just become natural. And that's what I'd like people to do, is recognize that you don't have to take on everybody's problems. You don't have all the things that we're talking about in the soft skills. It's like it's little incremental tweaks that we're doing in our way of kind of our way of being. And a lot of people around me talk about the difference between being a human being and a human doing. So it's about helping you change the way you are in the world naturally so that your
Mhm,
life works. And
mhm,
that's what the soft skills are about, right? It's about not just your life working, but in your business, right? It's like recognizing that the more you build these skills, then they become second nature to you, just like whatever your technical skills are.
mhm. Absolutely, yeah. I can definitely attest to that. It made me laugh when you talked about brushing your teeth because I think there was one time like I told my wife I was going to grab something out of the bathroom, and I walked past like the sink, and for some reason I just went in autopilot because it was in the morning. Grabbed my toothbrush, started brushing my teeth, and she was like, "Hey, what happened to you?" I'm like, I stopped to brush my teeth." She's like, "That wasn't what you." I was like, "It's just an autopilot thing." I mean, it's ingrained in there. So now you mentioned about the book. What's been some of the feedback that people have given you as they've read the book or seen, the different concepts in the book?
Well, the one of the things that I love that people have tended to say after they've read it is, they're practical tips. I'm a lawyer, but I don't wanna lawyer people to death, and I'm a big fan of even breaking the law down because it's our law, right? It's supposed to be something that we're choosing to govern our own conduct. So, I don't like to speak in legalese and fancy language. I'm a very, like, no frills kind of person. And it's because I like to connect to people of all types of, backgrounds. And so basically when they say practical, I think that's really wonderful for me to hear is that, they can easily implement them. The whole reason I expanded the 3rd edition with the workbook being about twice the size of what it was before is because, again, this is about building the skill. And so what I am hearing is that that's an effective way of then having it just come more naturally. Look, I'll admit, and most people will tell you that too, they don't always wanna do all the exercises, right? But it's just like going to the gym and building up muscle, right? Like, it's like, we don't always wanna go, but we know if we do, we're gonna feel better afterwards.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I can attest to that. Yeah, that is so true. So now if
That
people are
was my
interested.
partner yesterday, and I said, "No, no, we said we were going to the gym." So I made him go, and then he didn't wanna leave.
It's funny how that happens, like, when you're, like, pushing against something and then you finally do it. Because I find that often myself, like, I'm not really feeling like going to the gym." And then later on, my wife calls me like, "Hey, where are you?" "Oh, I'm at the gym." It's just like, "I thought you said it was gonna be a quick workout." That's what I thought too.
Yeah. Yeah, and, yeah, so I work with people on that too, about just keeping your promises to yourself and developing the
Mhm.
habits. I was a big fan of Atomic Habits. I started reading that at the beginning of the year, so that's been guiding a lot of my year to atomic being little
Mhm.
habits again, because we're too overwhelmed to completely overhaul our lives, and most of us don't
Yeah.
need complete life overhaul.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if people are interested in finding out more about you and they're interested in getting their hands on that book, where can they find you online?
You can go to nschick.com. So it's N for Nancy and then Schick, my last name, law, because 'cause I'm a lawyer.com. And
Awesome, awesome. Well, I love it. I love it. And then on the website, they can find that book where they can get their copy. So that is awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, before we wrap up, one question I always love asking every guest that comes on is when you think about, the type of work you do, the type of clients you work with, what's two pieces of advice that you would share with them? And it could be something you've already said that you want to reiterate, or it could be something new.
Well, I think we'll continue on what I just said is that most of the time, you just need small tweaks in your behavior, and that's including in your business, right? Yes, in the beginning, you might have a lot of things that you need to put in place because 'cause you're building it, but for most people and most of the companies that I work with, they've been in business more than 10 years. And maybe the pandemic, brought some results they didn't want, and we'll call it that. And so, it same thing. It's like, let's go back to just looking at the beginning and where could you maybe tweak your marketing or your messaging, the way that you've set up your processes. I'm not a marketing expert, but I can usually see, hey, if you're having repeated issues with your employees, for example, I can usually help you pinpoint one little thing that you could do to change that conversation. So that's one thing is to know that there aren't major overhauls that you necessarily need. We start small so that you can implement them and see progress. The second thing on that note is that one of the big issues that I'm still seeing a lot of, especially because of all the pandemic assistance that was given, is worker misclassification. So people are still misclassifying employees as independent contractors. And I can tell you with PPP and EIDL and all of that pandemic assistance that also went to unemployment insurance, the Department of Labor, the IRS, the state tax departments, the workers' compensation boards in various states, they're pulling the data together and they're recognizing that a lot of people are not paying what they were supposed to. And it's far better for you to get those things in place than be like some of the people that call me and they've got somebody who's injured that they classified as an independent contractor. Now they've got an uninsured claim, so they've got penalties to pay as well as an underlying injury claim, and the owner is personally responsible, even if you're an LLC, corporation, etc. So that's the big thing that I want people to know. It's like, please protect yourself. The insurance is like usually a lot cheaper than the claim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Nancy, thank you so much for being an amazing guest, for coming back on the show. It is always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me back. Always great to be with you.
You just checked out the Law and Finance Show, where we bring you great, insightful interviews that talk about the business and the financial side of managing a law firm. So subscribe to the show and check out more of the